A woman is dead in Minneapolis. And within hours, the story was already declared finished. Federal officials spoke with certainty. They said she used her car as a weapon. They said the shooting was justified. They moved on, but certainty is dangerous when it arrives too quickly. Because then the video emerged, not dramatic, not explosive, just quiet, ambiguous, uncomfortable, frame by frame. It slows the official story down. It does not scream innocence, but it does not confirm guilt either. And that space in between, that uncertainty, is where democracies are tested. I'm Fareed Zakaria. Today, I want to talk to you about what happens when power explains itself, before questions are even allowed to be asked. If you believe accountability still matters, stay with me. Share this conversation. Because before we debate justification, we must confront something far more basic. What actually happened? And why are so many questions still unanswered? That takes us to where this story truly begins. The question is not only why a woman died, it is why clarity disappeared so quickly afterward. In any democracy, the use of lethal force by the state triggers a simple expectation: an independent investigation, clear facts, public accountability. But here, those expectations collide with something else: federal power, political urgency, and a narrative announced before the evidence was fully examined. We are told this was a targeted operation. We are told agents were threatened. We are told deadly force was necessary, yet crucial details remain missing. Why was this woman stopped? On what legal basis? What did officers intend to do if she complied? Arrest her? For what charge? These are not technical questions. They are foundational ones, because without answers, we are not judging an incident. We are judging trust. Trust in institutions, trust in investigations run by the same system under scrutiny. Trust that truth matters more than speed. And when that trust erodes, tension fills the vacuum. To understand why this moment feels so volatile, we have to step back. We have to look at how we arrived here. To understand how we arrived at this moment, we have to widen the lens. This story did not begin on a snowy street in Minneapolis. It began years earlier, inside a system under growing strain. Immigration enforcement has become one of the most politicized functions of the American state. Not gradually, abruptly. Policy shifts came faster than institutions could absorb them. Operations expanded, pressure increased, agents were asked to do more, faster, under louder political demands. At the same time, public trust fractured, federal authority grew more assertive, local and state governments grew more skeptical. The gap widened. In that environment, enforcement stops being just enforcement. Every encounter becomes symbolic. Every action is interpreted through fear, loyalty, and ideology. Add history to that mix. Past violent encounters. Officers trained to anticipate danger. Citizens trained to distrust authority. Now place that system on ice-covered roads in unmarked moments with no clear explanation offered to the public. This is how routine operations become flashpoints. Not because of one decision, but because of accumulated pressure. And under pressure, mistakes or perceptions of them become inevitable. That pressure explodes in moments like this. And that brings us to the first rupture. What turns pressure into tragedy is not ideology. It is a single moment. In this case, that moment unfolds in seconds, but its meaning stretches far beyond them. Video shows a vehicle stopped in the roadway, not speeding, not charging, paused, awkwardly positioned, then movement, a gesture to let another car pass. Agents exiting their vehicle, commands shouted out of the car. One officer approaches the front of the SUV. A place training usually warns against. Another moves toward the driver's side. The car shifts, reverse, then forward. And in that narrow window, judgment replaces policy. A gun is drawn. A shot is fired. Then two more. The vehicle pulls away, crashes nearby. A woman is dead. Officials quickly label the moment a clear threat, a car as a weapon, an officer in danger. But the video refuses simplicity. It does not confirm a ramming attack. It does not clearly show intent. It shows ambiguity, and ambiguity is dangerous when force is final. If you want to understand how 1 second can redefine trust in authority, stay with me. Because the real crisis is not just what happened, it is how the system responded afterward. And that leads us to what lies beneath the surface. What lies beneath the surface is not chaos. It is structure. Every law enforcement system runs on rules, training manuals, use of force policies, scenarios designed to slow instinct and protect life. In this case, those rules matter. Officers are trained not to stand in front of a moving vehicle. They are trained to approach from the side, to reduce risk, to create options other than lethal force. They are also taught something else. That shooting at a moving car is one of the most dangerous choices an officer can make. Dangerous for the officer, dangerous for bystanders, dangerous for the driver. Deadly force is allowed only under narrow conditions. When there is an imminent threat of death or serious injury, when no reasonable alternative exists. So the question becomes unavoidable. Was this moment unavoidable? Could the officer have stepped aside? Could distance have replaced bullets? Could time have replaced force? These are not moral questions. They are procedural ones. And procedures exist precisely for moments like this. When fear is high, when judgment is compressed into seconds, when systems work, they slow violence down. When they fail, explanations rush in afterward to fill the silence. That is when accountability becomes fragile. And when accountability becomes fragile, consequences become uncertain. Which brings us to the next crisis. When accountability becomes uncertain, tension accelerates. This is where the second crisis begins. Not on the street, inside the investigation itself. In theory, officer-involved shootings follow a familiar path. Multiple agencies, independent review, checks that reassure the public the system is not judging itself. But here, that path narrowed quickly. Federal authorities took control. State investigators stepped back. Local officials said they were effectively shut out. And perception matters, because when the same institution involved in a killing also controls the inquiry, even a fair process can look compromised. Political pressure only intensifies that problem. Senior leaders declared the shooting justified almost immediately. Public conclusions arrived before investigators finished asking questions. That sequence reverses trust. Instead of evidence leading to judgment, judgment appears to lead the evidence. For investigators, that creates gravity. Every decision pulls toward a foregone outcome. And for the public, it sends a message. Not that the truth is being sought, but that it has already been decided. In moments like this, institutions don't just investigate events. They reveal themselves, and what they reveal shapes how citizens feel long after the facts fade. Which brings us to the people most affected by all of this. For you, this story is not about policy manuals or jurisdictional lines. It's about a feeling, the feeling that something irreversible happened too fast. And that explanations came too easily afterward. You watch the video, you hear officials speak with confidence, and you're asked to accept that this was unavoidable. But you're left wondering, what if it had been your sister, your friend, someone you know, frozen in fear, surrounded by authority, unsure what was happening? You imagine being told to exit a car in seconds, in confusion, in snow, with guns drawn, and then it's over. When the state uses lethal force, it asks for your trust. Not blind trust, earned trust. That trust depends on openness. on passions, on the willingness to question power, not protect it. If this moment unsettles you, you're not alone. That discomfort is civic instinct. Hold on to it, talk about it, share this conversation. Because societies don't lose accountability all at once. They lose it when ordinary people stop asking hard questions. And the next question is bigger than Minneapolis. It's what this means for the rest of the world. What happens in Minneapolis does not stay in Minneapolis, because the world is watching how democracies handle force, especially when power feels threatened, especially when politics is loud. Around the globe, governments face the same dilemma. How to enforce law without eroding legitimacy? How to act quickly without abandoning restraint? When federal authority overrides local oversight, it sends a signal beyond borders. It tells other states what is acceptable, who controls the narrative, and how much transparency is optional. In fragile democracies, leaders point to moments like this and say, even they do it. In strong ones, citizens ask harder questions. They debate rules. They demand distance between power and accountability. This is how norms spread, not through speeches, through precedent. One investigation handled narrowly becomes a template. One justification offered too early becomes permission elsewhere. And in an interconnected world, trust is contagious. So is distrust. The real global risk is not one shooting. It is the normalization of opacity. If powerful democracies stop proving their restraint, they lose the moral authority they rely on abroad. And that brings us to the future. Because the path forward is not singular. There are several ways this story can end. The future now splits into three possible paths. Each one reveals something different about power and restraint. The first path is the best case. Full transparency, independent review, clear answers to uncomfortable questions. In this scenario, institutions slow themselves down. They release evidence, they allow scrutiny, they accept criticism. The outcome may still defend the officer's actions, but the process restores trust. Not because everyone agrees, but because everyone can see. The second path is more familiar. Partial disclosure, limited oversight, closed conclusions. Here, the investigation ends quietly. No charges, no major reforms. Life moves on. Trust doesn't collapse, but it thins. People stop expecting clarity. They adjust their expectations downward. The system survives, but weaker. The third path is the most dangerous. Opacity becomes normal. Questions are framed as hostility. Doubt is treated as disloyalty. In this future, accountability is conditional. It applies to some, not to others. Force becomes easier to justify and harder to question. History shows us something important. Democracies rarely fail all at once. They erode through precedent, through small permissions granted in moments of fear. Which future unfolds depends on choices made now, not just by officials, but by citizens. And that leads us to the final question. This moment asks something simple of you, but not something easy. It asks whether you accept speed over truth, whether conclusions can come before questions, whether power should ever be too big to pause. I'm not asking you to choose a side. I'm asking you to choose a standard. A standard where lethal force is examined, not explained away. Where investigations convince, not close ranks. Where doubt is treated as civic responsibility, not disloyalty. Democracies do not survive because they are perfect. They survive because they correct themselves. Again and again, what happened in Minneapolis matters. But what matters more is what follows. Will this be another story that fades? Or a moment that sharpens expectations? That choice does not belong only to officials. It belongs to you. To what you question, to what you share, to what you refuse to forget. If this conversation made you think differently, pass it on. If you want deeper analysis of power, accountability, and the systems shaping our lives. Stay with me. Because the most important stories are never just about what happened. They are about what we decide to tolerate next.